and are ready for chapter 13. Okay? We're not reading nearly all of this book, just lifting up a few things that I think are interesting to me. At least I read through the whole book week before last and marked again those things that I thought might be most helpful, particularly for all of us who have contentious wives. They're mentioned several times. None of those in here, Kelly said. That's right. All right, let's pray. God, thank you for this day, the day you have made. Help us rejoice and be glad in this day. Help us open your book and look for those things that are true, forever true, about you and about us, and how we may properly live our lives in a way that pleases and honors you. We offer our best effort in Christ's name. Amen. Chapter 13. Remember, Proverbs is a collection of wisdom literature. And when we get to the next book, Ecclesiastes, we're going to get a different taste of the wisdom period. There came a time in Israel's history when they had some philosophers who felt that they had been sort of beaten over the head for centuries because they had not been wise. They had been foolish, the Israelites, and that if they could gain wisdom, they would do better. We know there came a period in the 4th century, before the Common Era, when the Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, had great influence on the Mediterranean world. But the Romans also had Proverbs, the Greeks had Proverbs, and the Israelites had Proverbs as well. So let's look at a few. Chapter 13, look at verse 7. Some pretend to be rich, yet have nothing. Others pretend to be poor, yet have great wealth. Verse 11. Wealth hastily gotten will dwindle. You heard of the nouveau rich? The new rich often do not appreciate what's come to them. Aren't you amazed at how many singers, rock and roll, country western, who make more money than they ever dreamed about, and all they can think to do with it is buy white powder that they snort up their nose? Aren't you amazed by that? It amazes me. Wealth hastily gotten will dwindle, but those who gather little by little will increase it. And there's something to that for sure. When we work hard and then gradually accumulate, we usually treat monies differently than we did the first time if it came too quickly to us. I remember when Gail and I were making out our wills, updating them the last time, and one of the attorneys in our church we had chosen to help us, and he was suggesting that if you leave money to your children, you might want to leave it in two different major payments, he said. They may not appreciate it the first time, and 5 years later, 10 years later, they might appreciate more. That was his suggestion, because he had seen so many, he said, who got it all, the inheritance, whatever it was, at one time, and did not use it wisely. And if they'd had a second opportunity, maybe they would have done better. Verse 12, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. And we've all had hopes deferred at some time or other in our lives. Look at verse 20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm. And we learn to pay close attention to the friends our children chose. Our daughter chose really poorly in selection of friends, and she became one of them. And our two sons chose so wisely. They had really great friends. Our daughter was oldest, and when she would bring her friends over, we had to lock up the silverware to keep them from stealing it. And we thought, gee, if this is the next generation, what is the world coming to? And then Trey started bringing his friends, and Jason later his friends, and they were wonderful kids, really terrific and fun to be around. So watch carefully your kids' companions. If they walk with the wise, they're more likely to become wise. And if they run around with fools, according to this author, they will suffer great harm. Verse 24, educators might not buy into this today, but the wisdom of that age was those who spare the rod hate their children, but those who love them are diligent to discipline them. The righteous have enough to satisfy their appetite, but the belly of the wicked is empty. Chapter 14, verse 7, leave the presence of a fool, for there you do not find words of knowledge. So again, you're more likely to mirror the folks you spend time with. Choose your friends carefully. Verse 11, the house of the wicked is destroyed, but the tent of the upright flourishes. They hoped that was true. They discovered, of course, it wasn't always true. That sometimes the tent of the righteous may be destroyed by fire, by storm, by whatever. And sometimes the wicked seem to flourish and do quite well in this life at least. Thank you very much. Verse 14, the perverse get what their ways deserve, and the good what their deeds deserve. And we wish again that we're always true. Verse 17, one who is quick-tempered acts foolishly, and the schemer is hated. How many times on your 10 o'clock news do you hear about road rage? Somebody chases somebody else down, somebody gets out of the car, and somebody gets hurt or killed. Tempers too near the surface, and people acting out on momentary thoughts, not thinking through. Go to verse 22. Do they not err that plan evil? Those who plan good find loyalty and faithfulness. And again, that is an adjective, not an adverb. Good is the right word. Plan what is good is what's meant, not plan well. Those who plan good find loyalty and faithfulness. Or it could be a noun even, actually, in this case. I think it is. They plan what is good, if you would, the good. In all toil there is profit, but more talk leads only to poverty. In other words, don't stand around and talk about it. The other night, we got in from the library dinner Friday night, and I was brushing my teeth, turned on the television in the bathroom there. It's a little set. It shines in the mirror. And Jay Leno was showing what happens to taxpayers' dollars. And this happened to be a road construction crew. And somebody had taken a picture. This was right outside the White House. They're working on a street there. And there were 8 guys leaning on their shovels. Nobody doing a thing. At the point the picture was taken, nobody was doing anything. They were talking. So this is the word of that. Verse 29. You'll see some of the themes recurring, of course. Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding. Not hot-headed folks, but one who has a hasty temper exalts folly. Absolutely true. Verse 31. Those who oppress the poor insult their Maker, but those who are kind to the needy honor him. That's certainly a good one. Chapter 15, verse 1. This is what counselors call, here in the first verse, persons who are able to draw heat out of a moment. Draw heat out, not put more heat into. A soft answer turns away wrath. But a harsh word spoken, stirs up more anger. The tongue of the wise dispenses knowledge, but the mouths of fools pour out folly. The eyes of the I am who I am are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. Okay. So today we talk about how many cameras there are in all of our major cities, watching. All these hundreds of years ago, this author said, guess what? God's watching you all the time. Skip to verse 8. Remember that throughout the writing of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, they had a system of sacrifice. That all ended in the year 70 of the first century of this common era when the Romans destroyed the temple. No Jews have offered blood sacrifice in 1940 years. Okay. No one. But they did have a system of sacrifice when these scriptures were written. So notice, though, that even here, there's a word that just offering sacrifice is not enough. It's what's going on in the heart and mind as well. The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the I am who I am, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. The way of the wicked is an abomination to the I am who I am, but he loves the one who pursues righteousness. And righteousness, remember, means right standing. We stand right with God when we trust that we have God's goodwill. God wants good to come to us. And we stand right with others. New Testament word, when we do agape. When we do agape, when we put ourselves out for the well-being of another, we stand right with them. Okay. Verse 15. All the days of the poor are hard, but a cheerful heart has a continual feast. Meaning, we know the poor have a difficult time, but even when we are poor, the attitude of our own heart and mind has much to do with the way life is going for us. And there are people, I remember my mom and dad saying how poor they were in the 1930s in the Great Depression when they were growing up, but everybody they knew was poor. So some, were angry about it, and some were doing the best they could with a cheerful heart in difficult times. Look at verse 16. Better is a little when one stands in awe of the I am who I am than great treasure and trouble with it, with the money. Better is a dinner of vegetables. This was before vegetarians, folks. This was a time when people loved meat and the fat that came with getting to eat meat. But most of the time they didn't get to eat meat. What few little animals they had, if they had any, they had to care for. They needed the milk, or they needed the cheese they could make from the milk, and so on. They didn't kill and eat them often. Certainly not poor people. So better is a dinner of vegetables where love is than a fatted ox and hatred with it. We all know that. If there's goodwill at the table, if everybody at the table is getting along and caring for and about each other, then whatever you eat is going down much better. Here again, anger, verse 18. Those who are hot-tempered stir up strife, but those who are slow to anger calm contention. And then another word for working hard. The way of the lazy is overgrown with thorns, but the path of the upright is a level highway. Okay? Skip to verse 27. Those who are greedy for unjust gain make trouble for their household, but those who hate bribes will live. In Tulsa, I think most of us don't live with this business of bribes. And if you've ever had to contend with it, you know how distasteful it can be. First time I really remember facing that was when Gail and I and a couple who were friends of ours, we were very newly married, a few months, decided to go into Mexico. And we got to Laredo, in Nuevo Laredo there, to cross the border. And it was in the summer. We were out of school. It was, in Laredo, it was probably 105 degrees, and the pavement was just asphalt. And it was so hot that it was, oozing liquid up through the asphalt. It was so miserably hot. And they had one fellow in there typing up your admission into Mexico form with two fingers. And there must have been 300 standing in line outside in 105-degree heat, and a couple of officials walking the line with their hands out behind them. And if you put a 10 or a 20 into their hand, suddenly they found a reason to move you to the front of the line. I'd never really seen that before. Never had. And 3 against me said, "Give him $10. And I said, "Not today." And I stood there in the sun with sweat running down my back and waited my turn. I wasn't going to participate in bribes. It happens in other countries, of course. More than here, I think, I hope. Gail said she was on my side. So, okay. She was on my side. Ben and Joy were the ones. That's it. And he became a bishop, so whatever that means. Chapter 16, verse 8. Better is a little with right standing than large income with injustice. Verse 11, showing again how seemingly small some of these concerns were, but how huge if you were poor. Look at this 11. Honest balances and scales are the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are His work. And I've told you, many of you knew this, of course, in our country, one of the first agencies in our new government was Weights and Measures. Weights and Measures. There is a building in in Washington, where they actually have a cup, a pint, a quart, a gallon, an inch, a foot, a yard, etc. Our country was founded on the idea that we would have honest measure for the poor as for the rich. I told Gail, a couple of weeks ago, I was watching Rick Steves. Rick Steves traveling in Europe. This was on one night, and I was flipping through the channels, and here he was. And I've read a couple of Rick's books, and we've used some of his travel guides when we've gone before. He was in Eastern Europe that just 20 years ago had been under communistic rule, iron thumb of the Soviet Republic for so many, many years, and now free. He walked into a farmer's market in this Eastern European city, and he was commenting about, look, these farmers produce beautiful stuff here. And they had radishes and tomatoes and now some cherries and summer fruits. And at each little place, he bought him a little bag of this and a little bag of that. And they were weighed and he paid. But he said, I want to show you something. And when he got to the end of the street where the market was, as you were leaving, there was another scale. And you could check to see that the merchant had treated you properly. And if not, you could tell the official, and they would go back with you to make it right. So that was their way. So they're learning. They're learning. After being so dominated by the communists for so many years, they're learning to be fair with each other. To be fair with each other. Okay. Let's go on to verse 16. You can see this is why we call it wisdom literature. How much better to get wisdom than gold? To get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. So wisdom and understanding to be desired. Verse 18, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Those are words we know. Skip to verse 24. Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul, and health to the body. Pleasant words. Don't you love it when somebody says something kind to you? how much kindness means? I've told you that in the Middle East, where the Israelites lived, they had very little natural sugar. Very little natural sugar. Finally, they would have dates, and if you let them mature properly, they finally taste very sweet. But it was really a special thing when you came across a honeycomb. Even when I was a child, after World War II, when rationing had finally gone away, but you still we didn't have the money to have anything very special like that. When the men who worked at the little gas camp my dad worked for would be putting through a new pipeline connecting one of the wells with another to the compressor station to send that natural gas to the processing refinery and then on to Pennsylvania was where their contract sent all the natural gas. When they'd come across a bee honeycomb in a tree, and it was, every year or so they would find one, a huge one. They'd see the bees swarming, and then see there was a hole into the tree, and they had built their hive down in the tree. And as soon as they were through work that day, everybody that wanted to, my dad would come home and get a couple of big dish pans, and all of us who wanted to go down and see them get that honey out of that tree. It was wonderful. Very, very special. Okay, verse 28. A perverse person spreads strife, and a whisperer separates close friends. We'd call them gossips. A whisperer. All right, some of you like this one, but I'm not calling any names. Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life. There you go. All right. And then back to this old problem, anger. One who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and the one whose temper is controlled than one who captures a city. See how desirable it was to have people that didn't spew all the time, overreact to everything. Chapter 17. Better is a dry morsel with quiet than a house full of feasting with strife. Gail and I had a couple who were friends of ours shortly after we married. I was still a student at Centenary at that time in Shreveport. And they could be really fun people. But then her father died. And she inherited from him. And he wasn't a man of millions of dollars, anything like that. But suddenly she and her husband's father was a policeman, so he had never made a great deal of money in a little town of Carthage, Texas. And suddenly they had more money than they'd ever had before. And when we would go out to eat with them after that, they always found something to complain about. They felt power, as it would. The rolls were not hot, the steak wasn't this, the potatoes were too thick or too thin or too whatever, until it just wasn't fun to be with them. It wasn't fun to be with them, and we decided to move on to other friends. We moved to Tulsa, and in this church there was a couple that befriended us more than others right at the beginning, and we discovered they fussed about everything. If I go to a restaurant and I don't feel well served, I do not create a scene. I just choose a different restaurant the next time. I don't want that while I'm eating. I really like peace and quiet. Peace and quiet, at least while you eat. Verse 3. The crucible is for silver, and the furnace is for gold. But the I am who I am tests the heart. Verse 5. Those who mock the poor insult their Maker. See how many times this is a reminder that God must love the poor, or He wouldn't have made so many of them. Treat them always as children of God. Verse 6, grandchildren are the crown of the aged, and the glory of children is their parents. I've told you Dr. Charles Allen used to say openly, occasionally, grandchildren are the most wonderful thing in the world. He said they are God's reward for not killing your kids. Verse 9. And here again, I'm grateful to my mother and my father, but my mom was the primary teacher. When we were not in school, she was the primary teacher. And I think, maybe before I fully understood, was big enough to fully understand what she was saying. I told you last Sunday, I remember I told you again, you cannot... I can't think of the word I was going to use now, because I just have seen this word, and this is not the word she used. Oh, you cannot be offended if you refuse to take offense. You cannot be offended if you refuse to take offense. And here the word's affront. So look at verse 9. One who forgives an affront fosters friendship, but one who dwells on disputes will alienate a friend. When in families, you talk about one issue and suddenly somebody's dredging up, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I remember how it was 30 years ago when you said what. It doesn't help. It doesn't help. It just makes things more contentious. Verse 17. A friend loves at all times. That means real friends stick by you, good times or bad. And kinsfolk are born to share adversity. But notice the next verse. It is senseless to give a pledge to become surety for a neighbor. And what that means is, don't loan money. That's why we have banks. I have a brother who's a banker. I will give you his name. He loves to loan money to honest people who pay it back. If somebody can't get a loan, there's a reason why he or she cannot get a loan. And if you sign for him or her, you deserve whatever you get. That's what this author's saying. If you become surety for a neighbor, or you give a pledge for somebody else, if they couldn't borrow it from the bank, chances are there was a good reason, and they're not going to pay you back either. If you want to give somebody something, that's one thing. Don't count on it being a loan. Verse 22, I like this one. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a downcast spirit dries up the bones. Don't hang around folks who are always down. Be around folks who are up, who are encouraging, who are hopeful. Verse 17. No. Next chapter. Let's go into chapter 18, verse 8. Here again, this whisperer comes in. The words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body. Beware. This author would say they will make you sick. One who is slack in work, lazy, is close kin to a vandal. The name of the I am who I am is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and are safe. Verse 13. If one gives answer before hearing, it is folly and shame. Listen carefully. Does it not bother you when you watch somebody on television or on the radio interviewing somebody else and you can tell they didn't listen to the last answer? They were already thinking about their next question. They didn't listen to the answer. And sometimes they will ask exactly the question that the person just answered. They weren't paying attention. Okay. Verse 17. The one who first states a case seems right until the other comes and cross-examines. You ever had that experience on a jury? Ah, yes. I remember listening carefully to the prosecuting attorney, and I was sure this person was guilty. And then the defense attorney had a time. And after that case was laid out, and this was refuted, and that was refuted, and it seemed to make sense what this one was saying. The decision was much tougher. And I think that leads to what Jesus said, do not judge. You don't know enough to judge. You may have heard one side or even one little bit of a side. The person you're judging has not had benefit of defense attorney. Okay, let's go on to verse 21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. Okay. Life, yes. Good speakers who encourage, that's wonderful. People who are downers, not helpful. Verse 24. Some friends play at friendship, but a true friend sticks closer than one's nearest kin. A true friend may be even better than somebody who's blood kin to you. Let's go to 19. Verse 4. Wealth brings many friends, but the poor are left friendless. A different thought entirely. A false witness will not go unpunished, and a liar will not escape. Another thought. Many seek the favor of the generous, and everyone is a friend to a giver of gifts. Verse 9 picks up with a thought we had just a few moments ago. A false witness will not go unpunished, and the liar will perish. Verse 11. I did some of these over and over because I wanted you to see how this author is probably just, gathering thoughts from any number of different places. And, that sounds good, and wrote it down because it's repeating certain themes, as you can see. Verse 11, those with good sense are slow to anger, and it is their glory to overlook an offense. One cannot be offended if one refuses to take offense. Okay. Verse 13. A stupid child is ruin to a father, and a wife's quarreling is a continual dripping of rain. The Chinese would say, between your eyes. Verse 14. House and wealth are inherited from parents, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. 15, another thought. Laziness brings on deep sleep. An idle person will suffer hunger. If you don't work, you don't eat. Verse 17, another thought we've had several times already in Proverbs. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord and will be repaid in full. Not by the poor, by the Lord. Discipline your children while there is hope. Do not set your heart on their destruction. And again, how many times have we read about anger? A violent, tempered person will pay the penalty. And I remember when Gordon Spencer was one of our ministers, and Gordon had a lot more training in counseling than some of us. In theology school, there is a core curriculum that everybody has to take. You have to take certain courses. But then you can specialize, as in medicine or education and so on. And so once I had finished my core courses, a certain number of hours in Old Testament and New Testament and church history and so on, I chose to take all the rest of my courses in Bible and preaching. That's what I was interested in. That's what I felt called to do. So Bible and preaching. Well, Gordon had taken a lot more in counseling. And he had this little triangle, that he used a lot in his counseling. And he would show the staff as well. And one of the parts there was, this line to this line was called rescuer. And Gordon said, the rescuer inevitably becomes the victim. The rescuer becomes the victim. Okay? So, listen at the last part of verse 19. If you effect a rescue, you will only have to do it again and again and again. Okay? The people who get help will come back over and over and over. All right, let's go into chapter 20. We did every verse the last two times, so I'm getting to pick the ones I think are helpful here. Chapter 20, wine is a mocker, strong drink a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. Now, let's remember, in Judaism, drinking wine was a part of their lives. And there are any number of scriptures for them that talks about wine making glad the heart and so on. But throughout the Hebrew scriptures, drunkenness is condemned. Drunkenness is always condemned. So, social drinking, fine, with the Jews, all through their scriptures. On into the New Testament, because Jesus was a Jew, and so drinking wine, not a problem for them. Drunkenness is a bad thing. Verse 3, it is honorable to refrain from strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. Verse 4, a recurring theme, the lazy person does not plow in season. Harvest comes, and there is nothing to be found. My dad's family could be contentious and not fun to be around, but they worked hard. They worked really hard. My mother's people were fun to be around, but if it was a really pretty day, they went fishing. And my dad loved to point that out as the years went on, that even though he started at the bottom with the little natural gas company where he started, he literally was called what they called a roustabout. And that meant you shoveled and dug and, you had all the dirtiest, filthiest jobs out in the oil field. But he worked hard. He did work hard, and he eventually became the superintendent of all the East Texas operations for this independent named Alfred Glassell. And my mom's people weren't doing any better economically. Basically none of them doing any better. My mother was born in San Augustine County, and some years ago, the counties in Texas were all rated from most prosperous to least. And the bottom one was San Augustine County. A lot of people in San Augustine County plowed if they had nothing else to do. If the sun was out, looked like a good day to go fishing, they went fishing. So that's what this is trying to deal with here. Lazy person does not plow in season. Harvest comes, there's nothing to be found. Verse 10. Here again, a recurring theme, diverse weights and diverse measures are both alike an abomination to the I am who I am. Not treating all people the same. The finger on the scale for one, no finger on the scale for the other. Or two fingers on the scale for one and none for the other. Not right. Not right. Okay, verse 13. A recurring theme, do not sleep, or else you will come to poverty. Open your eyes, and you will have plenty of bread. Get up and go to work is the point. Verse 16, we're back to signing somebody's loan. We can't get one from the legitimate places. Take the garment of one who has given surety for a stranger. Get it now, because they're going to lose what they have. Seize the pledge given as surety for foreigners. All through the Hebrew Scriptures, you're to be kind to aliens, kind to strangers. You give to them food, you give to them drink, but you don't loan them money if you don't know them. That's the point. Verse 17, bread gained by deceit is sweet, but afterward the mouth will be full of gravel. 19, A gossip reveals secrets. Therefore, do not associate with a babbler. If he or she told you a secret, they're going to tell somebody else yours as well. That's the point. Verse 21. An estate quickly acquired in the beginning will not be blessed in the end. So again, quick riches, people who don't appreciate what's come to them, came too quickly, don't appreciate, don't handle it well. And in verse 23, a recurring theme, differing weights are an abomination to the I am who I am, and false scales are not good. Okay, go to verse 29. The glory of youths is their strength, but the beauty of the aged is their gray hair. There we go. I told you that I heard a rabbi speak at Temple Israel one time, and he said that the scripture of honor your parents in the Ten Commandments is really saying to the Jewish community, honor your parents, meaning honor people of age. It wasn't just your flesh and blood, mother and father. Honor aged people. Treat aged people with dignity and respect. Chapter 21. All deeds are right in the sight of the doer, but Yahweh weighs the heart. To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the I am who I am than sacrifice. And this year, when I'm going to be preaching from the Hebrew Scriptures, we'll see that theme recur. Isaiah, if you come to the altar and remember there is something between you and your brother or sister, get up and go make things right, and then come and offer sacrifice. So doing righteousness and doing justice, Yahweh appreciates even more than animal sacrifice. Verse 9. It's better to live in a corner of the housetop. That means one little bitty place up in the attic than in a house shared with a contentious wife. Verse 13. If you close your ear to the cry of the poor, you will cry out and not be heard. Verse 17. Whoever loves pleasure, you go fishing when the sun's out instead of plowing, will suffer want. Whoever loves wine and oil will not be rich. Okay. It's all a matter of appetites and how one deals with appetites. Verse 19, a recurring theme here. It's better to live in a desert land than with a contentious and fretful wife. Verse 25. The craving of the lazy person is fatal, but lazy hands refuse to labor. See how many times he says the same thing over and over here? Okay, look at verse 22. Chapter 22, sorry. Chapter 22. This is one of the most famous passages probably in Proverbs. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold. The rich and the poor have this in common. The I am who I am is the maker of them all. I know I told you this 2 months ago when my brother was inducted into the Distinguished Alum Hall of Fame at our high school. And Gail and I went back for that weekend ceremony. 3 were being honored, and one of them was an African-American attorney in Dallas. He has become one of the most prominent attorneys in the state of Texas. He's younger than my brother. The Dallas Morning News had said that there were 1,000 attorneys in Dallas-Fort Worth area, and this young man is in the top 10. And in the entire state of Texas, that he was in the top 50. And in the United States of America, in trial lawyers, he was one of the top 100. When he got his turn to speak that Friday night, he said, I told you this, that his mother and father had 5 children. His father was working. They were living in Galveston. And his father was killed in an accident, their industrial accident in Galveston. And his mother had never worked outside the home. She didn't know what to do but to take her children back to her home. And that was in Carthage, Texas. And she went to work for Tyson Food. There's a big chicken plucking place in Carthage. And she went to work for Tyson Foods, plucking chickens. But she told her 5 little children, you will go to school and you will do homework. Other folks work from 8 to 5. We will work from can to can't. But then he spoke and said, I've never told my 2 older brothers this. They were sitting there. In fact, they were just a few feet from Gail and me. These 2 older brothers were there. And this attorney, who's in his early 50s now, 52, something like that, these brothers in their 60s. They were the number 1, number 2 children out of 5. This guy was number 5. Their mother had never remarried, but had worked to get all 5 of them, college education. And he said, my 2 brothers, and he pointed specifically at the oldest of the 5 children, and said, he played on the first high school basketball team at Carthage High School that was integrated. When I graduated high school, we still had a black high school and a white high school. And then, of course, Panola County all was consolidated into one school district. And this attorney said, my brother was the first black athlete on an integrated team at Carthage High School. And he said the coach was wonderful to him. He was the guy that had coached me too. Bill Tatum was terrific. But the fans in almost every town were hateful. And they screamed horrible things. And some other players would give him unnecessary elbows in the face, in the groin, wherever they could. And my brother took it. Kept playing with his head up. And by the time our next brother, and then a sister, and another sister, and I came along, when someone would say, oh, you're one of the Cox boys, that was a good thing. That was a good thing. And I thought of them again when I read this last week. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. And his brother was daubing at his eyes. Yeah, this was a good name. We had a good name. Verse 6. Train children in the right way, and when old they will not stray. We only wish that were true. Wish that were true. Works well sometimes, not so well other times. Verse 8. Whoever sows injustice will reap calamity, and the rod of anger will fail. Those who are generous are blessed, for they share their bread with the poor. Verse 16. Oppressing the poor in order to enrich oneself, and giving to the rich will lead only to loss. This recurring theme. Look at verse 22. Do not rob the poor because they are poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate. Now, by crushing the gate of the city is where transactions took place. And so you crushed them again, the poor and the afflicted, by mistreating them, not treating them fairly, or even being generous with them. For the I am who I am pleads their cause, and despoils of life those who despoil them, the poor and the afflicted. You better be careful, because God watches them more closely than any others. If you mistreat them, you're going to deal with God. Again, make no friends with those given to anger. Do not associate with hotheads, or you may learn their ways and entangle yourself in a snare. Do not be one of those who give pledges, who become surety for debts. See how many times that's mentioned? Verse 28, I've told you about our next-door neighbor who pulled up the surveyor's pipe at our house. Here it is. Do not remove the ancient landmark that your ancestors set up. You're not supposed to remove the property stakes that surveyors have put down. Chapter 23, when you sit down to eat with a ruler, observe carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you have a big appetite. Don't overeat. We're in the presence of somebody who's bigger than you. Verse 10. Again, do not remove an ancient landmark or encroach on the fields of orphans, for their Redeemer is strong. He will plead their cause against you. Another theme, verse 13, do not withhold discipline from your child. If you beat them with a rod, they will not die. If you beat them with the rod, you will save their lives from Sheol, from death, the place of dampness, darkness. Verse 17, do not let your heart envy sinners. Because sometimes things seem to be going really well for them, but always continue standing in awe of the I am who I am. Verse 20, again, condemns drunkenness, not drinking wine for Israelites, but drunkenness. Do not be among winebibbers or among gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe them with rags. If they drink too much and eat too much, they aren't going to work, and they will be the loser. Verse 31, do not look at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup and goes down smoothly. At the last, it bites like a serpent and stings like an adder. Your eyes will see strange things, and your mind utter perverse things. You will be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, like one who lies on the top of a mast. They struck me, you will say, but I was not hurt. Why? Because you're anesthetized with alcohol. They beat me, but I did not feel it. When shall I awake? I'll take another drink. Chapter 24. Verse 13, my child, eat honey, for it is good, and the drippings of the honeycomb are sweet to your taste. Know that wisdom is such to your soul. Okay, again, people who didn't have much in their diet that was naturally sweet. Honey was wonderful. Why did they describe it all through the Torah as we're moving toward the land of milk and honey? Milk and honey. Wisdom should be the same to your soul, just as sweet. Verse 17, do not rejoice when your enemies fall, and do not let your heart be glad when they stumble, or else the I am who I am will see it and be displeased. Verse 19, do not fret because of evildoers. Do not envy the wicked, for the evil have no future. The lamp of the wicked will go out. Verse 28, do not be a witness against your neighbor without cause, and do not deceive with your lips. Do not say, I will do to others as they have done to me. I will pay them back for what they have done. No, you see, Jesus said, and the Torah says, no, do unto others as you would have them do to you, not as they have done to you. Look at verse 30. I passed by the field of one who was lazy, by the vineyard of a stupid person, and see, it was all overgrown with thorns. The ground was covered with nettles. Its stone wall was broken down. Then I saw and considered it. I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed warrior. You got to get up and go to work, is the point. Chapter 25, verse 6. Do not put yourself forward in the king's presence, or stand in the place of the great, for it's better to be told, "Come up here," than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. Verse 11, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. Isn't that beautiful? Verse 17, let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, otherwise the neighbor will become weary of you and hate you. Verse 21, if your enemies are hungry, give them bread to eat, and if they're thirsty, give them water to drink. For you will heap coals of fire on their heads, and Yahweh will reward you. The coals of fire, you see, meaning if you give back to them what they've given to you. If they're hateful and you're hateful in return, hey, everybody's equal. But if you return their hatefulness with goodness, it finally wears on them. Why is this person treating me differently from the way I'm treating her or him? Verse 24, a repeat, it's better to live in a corner of the housetop than in a house shared with a contentious wife. Chapter 27, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Let another praise you, and not your own mouth, a stranger, and not your own lips. Verse 15, this fellow must have had a hard time. A continual dripping on a rainy day and a contentious wife are alike. Verse 23, know well the condition of your flocks and give attention to your herds, for riches do not last forever. Again, don't be lazy. Chapter 28, verse 6, better to be poor and walk in integrity than to be crooked in one's ways, even though rich. Verse 9, when one will not listen to Torah, even one's prayers are an abomination. Verse 13, no one who conceals transgressions will prosper, but one who confesses and forsakes them will obtain mercy. Verse 19, anyone who tills the land will have plenty of bread, but one who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. 21, verse 21, to show partiality is not good, yet for a piece of bread a person may do wrong. Ought not to, may. It's really hungry, may do the wrong thing. Verse 27, whoever gives to the poor will lack nothing, but one who turns a blind eye will get many a curse. I've got to stop because I've got to go back to church. So I'm going to write down December 12, chapter 29. We're almost through, and we'll move quickly on into Ecclesiastes then next week. If you haven't been to church, we got bells and choirs and all kinds of wonderful things going on.